Hi, you're listening to Stephan, Livera podcast, a show about Bitcoin and Austrian economics brought to you by swan.com. Today, my guest is BowTiedMara. He is in Argentina, and we talk a bit about Geoarbitrage, FX in Argentina, Bitcoin use, and where things are going with CBDCs. Now, before we begin, the team at swan.com is organizing Pacific Bitcoin Festival. It's coming back this year. It's going to be on in LA in October on the 5th and 6th. The feedback from Pacific Bitcoin last year was fantastic. There is an awesome lineup of speakers, people who've already been announced, such as Jimmy Song, Elise Colleen, Pierre Richard, Lynn Alden, Greg Foss, Preston Pish, Corey Clipston, and so many more. And of course, I'll be there, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all there. There will be multiple stages. This is a fantastic opportunity to meet Bitcoiners, learn from Bitcoiners, and if you have family or friends, this is the perfect opportunity to bring them along. This is a great chance for them to see that Bitcoin is real, that there's a real movement here. It's not just a bunch of internet nerds. There's a real movement. And as you know to expect from the swan.com team, Pacific Bitcoin will be Bitcoin only. It's going to be an awesome celebration of Bitcoin. So come along, get the tickets over at pacificbitcoin.com and use code Livera for a discount. And now onto the episode with Mara. Mara, welcome to the show.
Hi, Stephan. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so Mara, I've been following some of your work in terms of your writing as well as some of your Twitter commentary, and I thought it would be interesting to talk. I know you have a bit of a focus around geo-arbitrage, mobility, dealing with currency issues, obviously, as you've said, you're in Argentina, and I think that'll be interesting for some listeners to talk about how that's working with, obviously, with the local currency, with the blue dollar rate, with Bitcoin, and all of these things all together. So do you want to just give us a little bit of a background on yourself and what your focus is?
So I'm originally from the Netherlands, and I moved here in 2005 to Argentina. And I when I started out here, I really tried to, be the normal immigrant in terms of trying to set up a local business, hire people, etc., and do everything in pesos. Of course, I was in a very Dutch kind of mindset where I thought like, okay, this is going to work this way. But then after a few years of living here, I actually found out that that wasn't going to work just because of the currency situation. So after a few years, I switched the billing completely to the US. I made a lot of business trips, a lot of referral business, etc. And now I just only work with the US and maybe one or two European clients. But yeah, that way, you're able to live a lot better here on a dollar standard, so to say, versus relying on the local economy.
Yeah, and as I read from some of your articles, you also talk a little bit about Bitcoin, also, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I've been in following everything in Bitcoin from around 2017, I started out with the whole crypto kind of universe with a lot of different coins, etc. But after a while, sort of distilled. And I'm kind of like a big Bitcoin maxi in a way. I also see some value in Monero just as a digital form of cash, maybe because it's so much easier to have privacy on that chain, but not really as a store of value compared to Bitcoin. So I'm pretty much a Bitcoin maxi at this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, certainly I take a Bitcoin only focus, and obviously my show is Bitcoin focused. But let's talk a little bit about, I guess, broader where things are going. I think even the title of your blog is actually also about geo-arbitrage and mobility, but you've also been writing about this concept of coercive immobility. So do you want to just expand a little bit? What are your views on what's coming there?
That's an article that I wrote a few weeks ago, and basically the idea of coercive mobility is that the state basically comes into communities and always jails or locks up the same people, and that's like they're coerced to get out of that community, and that's basically an ongoing process. And I inverted that theory or that idea to coercive immobility, because what we're seeing nowadays, and it started with COVID and maybe even before that, is that the states are trying to make it more and more difficult for people to travel. You can see this in many multiple layers. Like, for example, talking about the climate, people shouldn't take planes that much. Like, for example, when I talk to friends in Holland, it's really crazy that some of them actually canceled their holiday trips just to not have as much emissions by taking a plane. So that
Wow.
I mean, it's really the brainwashing is really up to that level already, and I think that will only intensify. And the climate is like a perfect excuse to install all kinds of measures and ways in which a central bank can limit your spending, or basically determine what you can spend your money on, which is something that China is the pioneer in. And I think in Europe especially, China is seen as like this great technocracy that everyone should follow, like the big example. So I'm pretty sure that with the whole vaccine passport idea combined with the CBDC, it will be very easy in the upcoming future just to limit your movements, basically. Because in a cashless society, what's going to happen is, everything is traceable, where you spend your money on. There's no anonymity anymore, which is so nice of cash. Even though, it might not be a great store of value, it still gives you privacy. So they can't really see... authorities can't see what you spend your money on. Now with the CBDC, that's completely different, and basically you can get caps on CO2 products, etc. So, you're already at your CO2 limit, and MasterCard is running trials with this. Other credit card providers also offer that. We have the whole ESG narrative, and I think that's only gonna increase. And the worst thing is, like, I don't think there's some kind of conspiracy around this. I really think the majority of people think this is a good thing for the environment. Everybody's really worried about it. And it's just a great way to install more control over the population in that sense.
Sadly, I think, and I've spoken about this publicly before, and I think I'm curious to hear what you think, but my view on this is that, unfortunately, most people, they just want to fit in with the tribe, right? They don't care, even if it's wrong, they would rather be with the tribe than be on their own and correct. And sadly, what does that mean? It means a lot of people just go with the narrative, whether that's COVID, whether it's climate hysteria, whether it's, you name it, they'll just go along with it. And so, unfortunately, there will be a lot of people who are very much pro whatever the propaganda is put in front of them. If the narrative is, be very afraid, you need to lower your emissions, you need to eat less meat or whatever, don't eat healthy food, be a vegan, eat the bugs, whatever, a lot of people will just go with that narrative. But then the question is, for those people who do, whether they are libertarians by principle or whether they just, they're a freedom-loving person, whether that's 10% of the population, we don't know. I think, what are the ways that those people will find a pathway forward? And I think part of that is what many people in this sort of Bitcoin and libertarian and sort of expat communities are, I guess, focused on. I'm curious if you have any reflections on that idea.
Yeah, definitely. And that's also where we come back to Bitcoin, because basically that's the only way where you can, send or receive money without anybody interfering with it, and that's so powerful about the whole network. And because it's so decentralized, it's going to be very hard for a state actor to do something about that. Which that's a factor that you don't have with all the other coins that have founders, pre-mines, etc. They're just a lot easier to coerce, and I think that is going to be a very important property of. I don't want to call it black market money, because then it already ties a sort of illegality to it. But I do think that's where we're going if cash is prohibited. At a certain point, or simply, cash just dissolves because everybody wants to use digital payments, no matter what it is. Because frankly, if you go to Northern Europe, there's already a lot of stores where you cannot even pay in cash, and people have less and less cash on them. And it's so convenient to pay everything with your credit card or your debit card. And of course that's true. But it comes with a caveat that, you do lose control over your privacy and your spending. which makes it really easy for the ECB to afterwards, implement something like a digital euro and just make sure that you're spending your money on the right things that, they think you should spend them on and not something else.
And I agree. I think we should try to fight the war on cash. For me personally, I try to earn and spend Bitcoin and Lightning directly. But if I can't use that, then my next priority, if I can, is physical cash. And only after that's not possible, that's where I'll look at, digital fiat, cards and so on. But I think of it like we can stave off that CBDC future if more of us use cash, right? Because in some sense, we're keeping it alive, right? But I'm curious, your idea there, what are you seeing there in terms of LATAM and Latin America and cash usage?
Yeah, so my perception of cash has changed dramatically since moving here, because before I was kind of like in the mold of everything, convenience, etc. But after living here for so long, it's really clear that cash does have a very important use case, and basically, I think about 40 or 50% of the whole Argentine economy functions on cash, or at least in the sort of gray sector, where a lot of people, for example, will receive a certain salary, and that's why the stats you see in terms of graphs, etc., are always like a bit off, because everybody receives a certain salary on paper, and that's what they use in those stats. But then on the side, they will usually, receive another 25% or 50% just under the table on top of that salary. And that's just so companies don't have to pay that much tax, because taxes here are really insane. So everybody tries to avoid taxes as much as possible. Of course, that's not legal, but, that is what happens in practice.
Yeah, and I mean, people hear about examples like this, even workers who receive tips, and workers obviously love receiving tips in cash because, well, whether they disclose that or not is up to them. And exactly. I presume a lot of those types of workers are not declaring those on their government income taxes. So I guess cash is another thing that sort of keeps that alive. And so in terms of where things are going, you've also commented on this idea that when these CBDC environments are coming, it'll matter what environment you're in, because if you're in, let's say, a very high compliance environment like the US or the EU compared to other environments, it might be a different story. So can you explain your views on that, or maybe elaborate a bit there?
Yeah, so technically what Argentina, for example, has created, and it lives a little bit in all of the Latin American countries, the informality. But especially here, since there are so many tariffs, taxes, and rules and regulations, for every rule that's implemented or thrown upon the population by the politicians, there's somebody who finds a way around it. And basically, the whole game here in society is trying to game the system as much as possible, because a lot of people are just not in agreement with what those funds are used for, etc. And they really try to get around it as much as possible, and with success. So every single time there's a new rate, for example, because we have, I think, right now about $20 rates. It's really insane. Every single time there's a new rate. So, for example, now they made a more favorable rate for agro exports, just so those agro producers start to liquidate their crops, which is happening now, but because they were waiting for something like that. So they were just basically, okay, you're going to get so much tariffs on our exports, because Argentina has really high tariffs on those exports. So it's a lot of cash coming in for the central bank coffers as well. That if you do not give us a better exchange rate, we're just not going to liquidate those crops, and we're just going to sit on them. So they finally did that, and now there was record exports after that. So there's always like this game of cat and mouse being played between producers, the government, and consumers. And basically for every rule there's an exception or a way to get around it, and that creativity really gave me another perspective on what government and the nation state actually means. Because, from the outside, if you look from the outside into Argentina, it's tax hell, it's really bad. But when you're actually in Argentina, you can see that nobody gives a fuck.
Right, and I think that's an interesting point, because certainly there are places where I think there are other countries that have a similar thing like that. That from the outside it can look like there's all these rules, but actually on the ground it's not really enforced, or certain elements are just not acting like that. And so in some sense, this top-down bureaucracy view, they might have this idea about certain rules, laws, regulations, etc., that they are pushing out into the world, but actually on the ground very few people are obeying that, or maybe that's just not how it is in practice. So before we get further into the dollar rates and all this, I'm curious, could you just explain for us a little bit about why Argentina? Like, why are you in Argentina as opposed to some other place, or a low tax place, or even just back in the EU? What was it? What appealed to you about Argentina?
My major is in Spanish literature. So I was always attracted to Spanish, to language, and to Latin America in particular. So after I finished, I just started traveling around. I was also doing a Portuguese course on the side. That's where I met my first wife. She was studying in Buenos Aires. She is actually Brazilian, but she was studying here in Argentina because a lot of Brazilians study here because everything is free. So public universities are free, even if you're a foreigner. Same with healthcare. It doesn't matter. And that's also, one of the reasons why Argentina has issues paying the bills, because, if everything is free, somebody's paying for that eventually, and that money has to come from somewhere. So you can see here in certain universities, this 60% is Brazilian, because in Brazil there's a quota, for example, for something like medicine, and here there's not, and everybody can just go in. And in Brazil they would be forced to, if they don't fit in the quota, they would have to go to a private university and pay tuition. But here, they can come here, do the medicine, and then they leave. So also in terms of value for Argentina, they're basically just educating a lot of people here and sending them off right after. So there's not a lot of value that sticks in Argentina in that sense. Then I moved here right after I finished studying in the Netherlands, and then that was around 2004, 2005. And after a while we separated, and I just stayed here, trying to make a living locally, and then afterwards switching to something else. So I came here basically with literature, which doesn't really pay the bills. I tried to, get a position here at the university, but I saw the salaries and stuff, and I thought, well, I'm not going to survive here if I want to do this. So eventually I completely shifted and started learning programming and digital marketing. And I got a job in that, worked for a while for a company. And then afterwards I decided to create my own company. And I've been doing that ever since. So first here just locally, and then afterwards I just focused on the international market, and mainly the US.
Yeah, right. And I think that's a common theme that we see with Argentina is people doing Geoarbitrage, this idea of earning from wealthier countries, from customers who are paying them in the wealthier countries, but living in countries where, let's say, the cost of living is a bit cheaper. So I guess you're interested in that, and you're focused on that case.
Yeah, so for me, it was kind of a natural way of going around things, because I was actually forced to do that. Otherwise, I would have probably moved back to Europe, or maybe try the US, because it's really, really hard to live on a peso standard here. Plus, there's a plethora of other difficulties that you come into touch with if you start a local company, hire local people. So one thing that happened is, we had employees here. And here, there's really like a suing culture. So every single time you fire an employee, they will basically start a lawsuit and bleed you dry. And the justice system is all geared towards the employee. they're always right. So it doesn't really matter what you do, but you're going to have to pay something. And after a while, that was just like, we had to leave the office. We had to, we basically lost most of the company savings. And then I sat down and had a real hard think. It's like, yeah, this is not going to work here locally. So then I just set up an international company and started working from abroad.
So in a way, it reminds me of this idea that you can pick and choose from the different countries around the world, as opposed to just going to one place and doing everything there. That you could be having staff that you're paying other overseas and not necessarily having to deal with not having to deal with Argentinian labor laws as much, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that has become more and more easy, and I think that's also one of the main theses in the Sovereign Individual, that book, for example, is that you can really pick and choose your jurisdictions, and it's going to make it harder and harder for nation states to be able to tax you, control you, etc. And the counterpoint to that is that's why I also think that they will start to push harder with CBDCs. With movement control, etc. So it's sort of like a two-way system that is working against each other, because at this point, I think we're at the peak of how easy it is. Because, for example, I have a US client, and they work with about 35 people that are all based here in Argentina. They don't have a local company, and they do everything through Deal. Now, they're contractors on Deal, so they need to provide sort of their tax IDs, etc., locally to Deal, and the rest of the taxes and all that those labor-related issues is on them. I see maybe in the future that things like that are going to be more complicated, but right now it's very easy to do such things. And as a company internationally, you don't have to worry about any of those local laws, etc. So that's really positive. But whenever I see big supranational organizations talking about worldwide taxation, etc., I sort of see that they want to do something about it. And one of the things that I also focus on a lot is investment migration with my company. And basically what we're seeing there is that they're trying, especially the EU, is really cracking down on citizenship by investment programs, even if they're not within the EU. So lately they've been putting pressure on Caribbean islands that offer CBDCs, basically saying if you don't up the price, we're going to take away your Schengen visa free access, etc. And St. Kitts already succumbed to that, and they basically said, okay, we're going to double the price to maintain that Schengen access. And the EU is doing that same thing within Europe, really trying to get rid of all the golden visa programs, while at the same time, they allow hordes of illegal immigrants basically to come in. So it's kind of a weird policy, but that's what I see. Like they're trying to make it harder for capital to move together with the people, and that's, I think, a global phenomenon. I think that will only increase.
I see, and I think I agree. That's definitely the direction we see some of these large, EU-style government organizations going. But on the counter side, there are still other countries who are competing for people, and so I think it's an interesting dynamic to see that, because in some ways, you have some countries who are trying to compete and trying to attract people there. And then on the other hand, you have, let's say, the EU trying to make it hard for people to do that. So do you just see more and more countries trying to compete, or do you see more companies or countries rather just going, oh, okay, we'll go with a global minimum tax, or we'll go with, etc., whatever bureaucracy you want, EU?
So yeah, I think there's a divide there, because what you basically see in South America is that they will remain neutral. For example, in a conflict that we have right now with Russia and Ukraine, Brazil, Argentina, like most countries here, they're sort of like, okay, it's not our problem. You guys fight it out, and we're not going to take a stance on this because it's not our issue, which I think is very wise. And they do that with a lot of stuff. So, for example, Argentina still has visa-free access for Russians. So does Brazil. And, of course, they have birthright citizenship here. So a lot of Russian migration, upper middle class, have come here with, pregnancies and just started to have kids in Argentina. The estimates are that it's about 15,000 so far that have done this, and about half of those people actually stay in Argentina, because once you have a child here, the child is automatically Argentine, and then after 1 year, more or less, the parents can also get citizenship. So, of course, if you're on a Russian passport or Belarus, for that matter, because they also have visa-free access still, it's very compelling, because then afterwards you can actually use those Argentine passports to travel around. And Argentina has the best passport in terms of visa-free access of South America. The only one that could potentially be better is Chile, because they have ESTA visas for the US, but they don't actually have more visa-free countries. That's Argentina's number one there. So yeah, having that versus a Russian or a Belarusian passport is, of course, phenomenal. So that's happening a lot, and Argentina is not trying to stop that either, because in terms of freedom of entry, freedom of living in Argentina, the constitution is really phenomenal, in my opinion. Once you are on Argentine soil, even if you're a tourist, you're considered an inhabitant. And the inhabitant has the same rights as a citizen or a resident. It doesn't matter. So once you're on the soil, you basically get the same rights. That's also why it's so hard for them to charge in public hospitals or public universities for foreigners, because basically they can't do that, because that would create a distinction which doesn't exist in the Constitution.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I wasn't aware of that. I am aware, though, that the Argentinian citizenship cannot be renounced, though. That's an interesting one, isn't it? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's always one of the things that Twitter brings up a lot. Like all the passport bros on Twitter is always like, yeah, but you can't renounce the passport, man. And it's like, yeah, of course, right now in the world, there are only two citizenships that charge based on your citizenship, and that's the US and Eritrea. So if you have one of those two passports, you're going to be taxed worldwide no matter where you live. And of course, you can renounce those, and you can't renounce the Argentine passport. But at the same time, how many Eritreans are paying that tax? And that's the question you need to ask with Argentina, is like, if they would ever implement something like that, nobody's going to pay taxes. Like, seriously, all the Argentines just be, yeah, okay, nice story, bro. It's like, because that's what's already happening right now in the country with actual residents. A lot of things, they're just going around it, and especially if they're living in another country, and it's just going to be, oh, and I can't renounce. Okay, well, I'm not going to pay tax either. So I don't think that's that much of an issue, to be honest. Because I also think, like, if they would ever do citizenship-based taxation, then that they would have to adjust that law that you would actually be able to renounce, because otherwise it's kind of like a lock-in that they have you forever. So
yeah, and I mean, as I'm sure you're familiar with the sovereign individual, they might well look for ways to try to, let's say, trap people into their tax net or into their, to stop people from leaving. That, like, we've seen that historically, that's happened. So I guess maybe that's where some of the concern is coming from. But I mean, certainly I agree with you that while the stated law written on paper might be one thing, what happens in practice is another. And that in that scenario, well, if you have an Argentinian passport and you're overseas working somewhere else, well, what's the possibility that the Argentinian government would go after you there? It's kind of unlikely, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the enforcement is already so hard locally, just in the country. It's almost, well, I wouldn't say a failed state, because a lot of things do work very well compared to, real failed states. But there's no real enforcement from the state. And it's really weird that, in a country that has so many rules and regulations on paper, and that's why in terms of economic freedom, it's always like in the, the bottom part. compared to Europe or the US. I've never felt more free in terms of not having the state breathe down my neck here versus Europe, for example. In Europe, I was constantly aware of, that state control, be it with cameras or, everything is being tracked all the time. And of course, I wasn't doing anything illegal. So in that sense, I could use the excuse, but I'm not doing anything illegal, so I don't care. But I did care because I just don't like that, I just want to live my life without, state breathing down my neck all the time. And that's basically something that doesn't happen here at all. You are here in a huge country because it's really huge, with not a lot of people. And, you're left to your own devices. Go do whatever and see how you survive. And that's something that I really like about Argentina.
Back to the show in a moment. CoinKite.com is the creator of my favorite Bitcoin hardware device, the Cold Card. And this is an ultra secure device that you can use to generate your Bitcoin private keys and write down your 12 or 24 words. And of course, there is a pre and post pin, so keep that in mind when you're writing things down. And you can use this device without even plugging it into a computer, which is a fantastic improvement in terms of giving yourself that additional peace of mind, because with Bitcoin, you need to keep your private keys secret. And the features and the tools that the Cold Card gives you help you do this. Over at CoinKite, you can find a range of other devices, and of course, you can pre-order the new device, which is coming. It's called the Q1. So to find all of that, go to CoinKite.com and get a discount on your Cold Cards using code Livera. Mempool.space is the leading Bitcoin and blockchain visualizer. You can do all kinds of things there, whether that's looking at Bitcoin on-chain, you can search transactions, you can target the fee for your transaction, and you can even use the Lightning Explorer to explore things like which Lightning nodes are big or well connected. They've even got a mining dashboard. So there's all kinds of statistics and things that you can find over at mempool.space. And don't forget, it's open source. So if you don't want to trust somebody else, you can host it yourself and run it on your own. They've got new features coming, so keep an eye out on the website and on the social media channels over at mempool.space. And now back to the show. Excellent. And I guess on the topic of survival in Argentina, can you share any insight for people on, let's say, security in Argentina, like crime rates and things like this? Is that a problem for people, like petty crime, or is that, like, presumably, you find it acceptable?
Yeah, so that's always one of the arguments that people come up with to not travel to Argentina, for example, or South America for that matter, because the crime rates in South America are higher than most countries in Asia, for example. But at the same time, in Argentina, crime rates are very low compared to other countries in the region. It's not like in Brazil where people will hold you up with maybe a gun or something and try to rob you. There is a lot of petty crime here in the city in terms of snatching your phone, or if you're not paying attention, maybe snatching a wallet. But it's the same thing in any big city. In that sense, it's not that different. If you just pay attention and you're not flashing around your wealth or your latest iPhone, then there shouldn't be an issue at all. I have, knock on wood, but I've never had any issues here with security, and especially in the city, you're not gonna have many problems with hold-ups or robberies and that kind of stuff. That happens on the peripheries, like in the more working class neighborhoods. So that's the stuff that you see on the news, and that's why most Argentines, they have this feeling that the country's so unsafe and insecure, because that's the thing that is portrayed on news and social media like all day. If one thing happens, you will see that on loop the whole day, and just that one thing. So that already indicates to me that it's not really that much of an issue, because it's always like, and it can be a really small case that, in the US would never get as much attention, for example. And here it's like, and everybody's talking about it, and that's the only thing they talk about for a day. And in the interior, it's even less. So if you go to other cities, or, just small towns, etc., it's really super chill. So I've also lived in Brazil for a while, and Brazil is definitely a different animal in that sense. I lived in Sao Paulo, where if you would just not pay attention and go from one really classy neighborhood and just walk down the wrong corner, it was just like, oh, all of a sudden I'm in like a semi favela with junkies fighting over the next shop, basically, and I need to run now. that happened a couple of times, and that kind of situation doesn't happen here at all. Like there are some mini slums here and there, but normally you don't come there, especially not if you're a tourist. So you won't really notice anything of that nature.
Great. Okay, and let's talk a little bit about the US dollar, the Argentine peso, Bitcoin, and where it all interacts. As you were saying, there are multiple rates for the Argentine peso. And so the typical thing I've heard, like in not just Argentina, but in other countries in general, is that there's often a government rate, but that rate's not realistic. And actually the real true rate is worse than that, or is, higher than that, but the government doesn't want to make it look bad. So they'll have a set rate at a particular level. So can you explain a little bit about how that's working in Argentina?
So from the central bank, they basically set a fictitious rate that nobody follows because there's caps on buying dollars. So as soon as they installed those caps with a limit of $200 a month that you can buy at that rate, the parallel market emerged, and basically that's the blue rate, which is double the official rate, because the demand for dollars is just so high. So everybody just buys dollars on that secondary market, which is technically illegal, but nobody does anything about it. And the official rate is used for some importers and other services, but because dollars are so scarce right now, like seriously, the liquid reserves are minus, I think, $14 billion right now. It takes a long time even for imports to clear now. So they have a 60-day window for the government to say, okay, you can get dollars at that price. While at the same time, for politicians and their families, they can buy dollars at that price without any issues. That's also in the small print of of the governance. So we're seeing the Cantillon system like in real time here in Argentina, where they get anything that's coming from the printer, they get it the quickest. They get access to dollars. They know when a devaluation is going to happen, and sometimes it's so blatant with bond purchases and selling directly from the government in volume that there's going to be devaluation, or it's
right.
Sort of like you could see it on the graph.
They know something's coming.
Exactly. This is not normal behavior.
Yeah. One quick question on this. So on this official government rate, if you let's say a foreigner comes to the country and they've got their debit card or credit card and they tap and pay, are they getting the official government rate there, or are they what rate is being used at that point? It's not the mid-market rate.
I think from last year onwards, or starting this year, they changed that rate because basically they weren't capturing any of those inbound dollars that way, because all the tourists that came here were just going to swap on the black market to get a better rate. Whereas if they would pay with their credit card, it would be twice as expensive because they were paying the official rate. So they changed that, and they now apply which is called the MEP rate, which is just like a 10% below the blue rate. So you're getting a lot better rate. It's still not exactly the blue rate, but it's very close. So if you don't want to carry huge amounts of cash with you all the time, then that's a good option. I would say, it's still worth the exchanging on the black market, just because a lot of businesses do not accept credit cards, or they will give a cash discount, etc. So it's still worth it to, at least when you visit, bring a decent amount of dollars with you to exchange on the black market. One thing that you do have to keep into account is that those dollars need to be as crisp as possible. It's called the blue rate because of the blue stripes in those new $100 bills.
I didn't know that. Cool.
Yeah, so that's why it's called Blue Rate. And if you have what's called the small heads, $100 bills with the smaller Benjamins, those are worth 5% less on the market. So nobody wants them because apparently they're more easily forgeable, etc. So they get a discount, and frankly, nowadays nobody wants to touch those. So it's nice when I go to the US, I just tell my Cueva, hey, give me all the small heads and at a discount, and then I spend them in the US because there nobody cares.
Right, so you get a little arbitrage there as well. Okay, interesting.
Exactly.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about how this works in terms of people using these markets and, of course, if, Bitcoin and maybe some of the stable coins, not that I promote stable coins, but just to understand, what's happening on the ground?
Yeah, so there's most cuevas, which is basically the money exchanges on the black market. What they will do is they will exchange cash dollars for pesos at that black market rate, or vice versa. They also, if you want to get money into the country, let's say I want $5,000, bringing that to Argentina from an account offshore. Of course, you're not going to send that through the banking system because of all the issues, withholdings, etc. So what they will do is they'll say, okay, you need $5,000 here. I will match you with a local that wants $5,000 offshore. You transfer it to that account, and you get the dollars here minus 4%, which is their fee. And you can have that either in cash dollars or cash pesos. And of course, you're not going to say pesos. You just swap dollars over time to pesos as you need them, just because they depreciate so quickly. So that is one way through the traditional banking system, which is kind of like a triangle. And then there's some younger cuevas, or with younger people, more millennials, that are also familiar with crypto. The most traditional cuevas don't handle crypto or Bitcoin. And there, I've swapped a couple times with Bitcoin. The problem with that is that there's because of the volatility in the settlement times, if you don't do it through Lightning, and most of these go really on chain, so it takes a while for it to clear. The price can, fluctuate. So most cuevas, they will rather prefer a stable coin just because of that. Because otherwise, you agree to a price, and then it's harder to stick to that price because they might lose out, or you might lose out if you use Bitcoin. So most of those transactions are used with USDT. And then funnily enough, and I love this because everything is always about, decentralization, etc. And here, just everybody uses a USDT from exchange to exchange over the Tron network, which is the only use case for Tron in this world, is because it's cheaper transaction fees. So that's the only thing that counts.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, decentralization just became a theater, and it's just kind of like regulatory arbitrage. I mean, they might as well not be using a blockchain at that point, right? It may just literally be a spreadsheet on Excel somewhere. But because it's a blockchain, and because I guess that's what people believe, right? And if that's what allows this kind of fiction to proceed, then that's what they're doing. Now, I guess the way I'm seeing it is, the US dollar demand is different to Bitcoin demand, right? Like, if you are a Bitcoin hodler, that's a different thing because you actually want to save and hodl Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. I get some people I see some people kind of complaining online that, look, there's this big use that Bitcoin is not solving. But at the end of the day, if a person doesn't want Bitcoin exposure, I'm not putting them down or something, but maybe they're just not ready for it yet. Maybe they are not in the economic position to be saving with Bitcoin. At least that's how I'm thinking about it. Of course, I earn and spend Bitcoin, and I would love to see more people do that. But I think I'm also trying to be realistic about what is the unique selling point of Bitcoin, and what are the cases where, look, if someone wants USD exposure, well, then they're gonna do whatever the cheapest and fastest thing for that is, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think you're spot on there, because what happens is there's a lot of people that younger people that do save in Bitcoin, and they just don't touch that at all. And the reason why they use so much stable coins and dollars is just because that is all, month to month kind of transactional payments that they need to swap back to pesos. So those dollars always need to be on the go and ready for them to change it to pesos whenever they need it. So it's really more of a practical issue. And those aren't really savings. So, if people really want to save, they will either have dollars in cash, or, if they're already up to the, Bitcoin hodl mode, then they will save in Bitcoin. And I know quite a few people, because the Bitcoin community here is pretty big. There are quite a few people that do that. And of course, those need to be savings that you don't need at all. And, that can be tough here in this economic environment where, most people just live month to month and they will need all the money that comes in.
Yeah. And I know also actually Moon Wallet. I know the Moon Wallet team are Argentinian as well. So I guess there's a lot of Moon users there.
Yeah. I actually use their wallet. It's really nice. And the Bitcoin Foundation here is really big. They do a lot of mining courses and it's a great community. Some big events also around Bitcoin. And I think it was around 5 years ago that there was still some, really diehard Bitcoiners here. One that I personally know, and he left for Mexico now, but he was seriously doing all of his finances on Bitcoin. He didn't spend any fiat, and he was just living on a Bitcoin standard for everything. And I think he still does that, even in, traveling around, etc.
Yeah. And so out of curiosity, for someone who wanted to go to Argentina and spend Bitcoin and try to do that, how feasible is that? Or is it more like you'd basically need to sell for cash and spend cash mainly?
Yeah, you're going to have to you're going to have to swap for cash, because most businesses, they don't even have a Bitcoin wallet, or they wouldn't know how it works, so they would become suspicious that maybe it's a scam, because there have been so many scams here with crypto specifically. And I don't know if you read, but like last week a guy got dismembered. He was also like a crypto trader, but basically he was scamming over tons of people, and he ended badly. That case is still ongoing, but like the stigma of that kind of scamming crypto sphere is around anything related to crypto, even Bitcoin. That people will perceive it that way. So it's not that easy to spend Bitcoin here, and frankly, not even easy to spend dollars, because the businesses just won't have the change, or it will be very hard for them to justify it in their administration, because what rate are they going to apply? Because technically they would have to use the official rate. So nobody wants to use dollars for day-to-day transactions here. So you just, everything gets swapped to pesos, and then you pay in pesos.
Interesting, because I've noticed in some other countries, again, not insulting Argentina or something, but other countries I've seen, some of them will do it where you can pay with USD, but they'll give you change back in their local currency. But that does require having, relatively liquid and stable exchange rates. And as you said, in Argentina, that's not a given, of course, with 20 different rates. And, maybe people would fight over what rate should be applying. There should be, because obviously the customer will say, no, I want the blue rate. And the merchant might say, no, I want to give you a lower rate so I can, so, there's obviously going to be arguments around that too.
Yeah, for bigger items, for example, they're all priced in dollars. So if you want to buy property here, or a car, the base is always in dollars. And for property, it's actually very rare that you can pay in pesos, or it will have like a very high rate tied to that. But most second-hand homes or used homes, they will always be traded in dollars. So if you want to buy an apartment or whatever, it's always going to be dollars. It can be a bag of cash, or just a wire. Most people also have US bank accounts. So what happens a lot of times is that the owner will just say, okay, I just deposit the funds into my US account. It doesn't even touch Argentina. You just pay the local taxes here on based on the contract, and that's that.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, yeah, it's just like the transaction was just not even done inside the Argentinian banking system at all.
Exactly.
Like it's just all happening outside. Okay, great. Yeah. Of course, we would love to, I would love to see a future where everyone just does everything natively with Bitcoin. But of course, I understand we're not there yet, and we have to kind of grow the base of Bitcoin users and grow we have to win hearts and minds in some sense. And so I guess let's talk a little bit about some of the property market in Argentina, because you've written about this also and you've been speaking about it. You've been talking about how they use US dollars for pricing. They have different markets in terms of already existing properties and then off-plan, or I forgot the exact term for that. But if you could maybe spell out a little bit of your thoughts around how the property market works there for people who are, thinking about that. And so, one other question. Can you buy property as a non-resident of Argentina?
Yes, you can. There's no limitations. The only limit there is for buying property as a foreigner is, even as like a foreign resident, is agricultural property. And the limit is that there can only be a max of 15% per province in the hands of foreigners. And right now, none of the provinces is even close to that. I think, the highest is about 6%. So, you can still buy whatever you want here. There's no limits there. And that only goes for rural property. So, a lot of acreage, etc. But, apartments, don't even fit that profile. So you can just buy whatever city property you feel like.
Yeah. And when it comes to getting residency rights in Argentina, do you need to buy a property above a certain threshold? Like other countries have that. Is there a threshold here, or how does that work?
So Argentina does not have a golden visa where if you buy property, you automatically get residency. So you will have to get residency through other means. And one of the most popular visas is the rentista visa, which is basically a pensioners or a passive income visa. They recently upped the amounts. According to the official rate, it should be around $2,000 a month that you need to show that you
like
can
income.
sustain yourself, income. But that can be $1,000 depending on, what kind of exchanges you use. So basically, I know some people that use Western Union. They send, because Western Union uses the blue market rate, which is kind of funny. So they use Western Union, they get in all those pesos, and then afterwards deposit them on their bank account to show the government, hey, look, I made, $2,000 this month. And then afterwards they swap it back to dollars, and they basically only had $1,000 per month instead of the 2,000, which is on paper. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways around that, but that's the most popular one.
A common way, yeah.
Yeah, after 2 years of showing that you have ties to the country, you can already apply for citizenship if you wanted to. So it's also one of the fastest routes to citizenship if you actually live in the country, and it's a pretty decent passport.
Interesting. Or as you said, if you are giving birth in the country as well, that's another way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess in terms of where things are going more broadly, if we zoom out a little bit and we think about, where things are going with CBDCs, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have any views there? I think you've mentioned that you believe around 2030 they're going to be commonplace. So do you want to expand a little bit on your views there?
So the trials that we're seeing around CBDCs in multiple countries, they're expanding. You can see Fed now in the US, which technically is not a CBDC, but it's like the road to a CBDC. ECB is running trials that are already ready to launch, like they did in China a few years back, where they launched the first CBDC. That's probably going to happen towards the end of the year. And the EU is particularly, scary in that sense that they also have one of the best, in quotes, digital ID programs. That is the program that the UN wants to use for vaccine passports, etc. If they would come around, that's the model that they would use. That's already been decided. That's also one of the reasons why I believe in the US it was New York that had like a similar vaccine passport program that was terminated because of that. Because that's basically going to be the blueprint. Now, of course, nobody knows if that will actually come to fruition, but I do think that in Europe specifically, they will start tying your digital ID to the CBDC eventually. And I already see it within the Netherlands, for example. If I want to do anything government related, it's all digital ID. You can only log in with your digital ID. It's tied to an app on your phone. You need to be physically there. It doesn't use biometrics, but it's really, I lost my access once and it's hell to get it back. That was a few years ago. So I still have it. I need it for some things that, admin stuff that I need to do in Holland from time to time. And, I can see that completely being woven into your bank account, your financial data. And everything is already so intertwined in Europe that, it won't be that hard to roll all these things out. Like, for example, I opened up a Greek bank account a few years back, and that already appeared on my Dutch tax system, like almost instantly. So it's already all connected, no matter what country in the EU you're in. Like, all that data is being shared and will pop up, everywhere. So yeah, that's something to look out for. And in that sense, I'm happy to live here where, majority still uses cash. I don't see a CBDC coming anytime soon. They might try. And the nice thing then is, like, they can try. And I'm pretty sure that within a week, we have a similar black market, parallel market situation where just everybody starts, buying stuff with Bitcoin or whatever. It would actually launch a Bitcoin standard way quicker, I think, if countries like Argentina try to outlaw it and try to install like a CBDC because they're so used to cash. So I think that would be very interesting. And the IMF, actually, one of their pinpoints for Argentina, which is the country with the biggest loan, I think it's almost 60% of the whole IMF portfolio is Argentina. That's why it's too big to fail. One of their points was that they should really crack down on crypto. So I've been seeing that with local exchanges already, that, the requirements are more and more complicated. In terms of data sharing, etc. So they're trying to go after it, but at the same time they're failing because people still use it a lot. So
yeah, and as we saw with El Salvador, obviously the IMF were going against them on Bitcoin also. So it may be a related thing, or for similar reasons that they were doing that. But I think, coming back to that broader theme we were mentioning, is that some of these big bureaucratic governments and states are trying to either increase the taxes or make it hard for people to leave. But then at the same time, there are other options around the world, and I think people can just open their eyes and be a little bit more open-minded to options that are out there.
Yeah, definitely. But people are really rooted in their communities and find it very hard to leave, which is understandable as well. And of course, everybody's also, or not everybody, but I would say the bell curve is real in terms of the bell curve meme. That is a real thing. Like you said, like everybody goes and stands behind the current thing, and that is really what is happening. So, if your government says that, these countries are very dangerous, then 80% of the people will probably think, oh yeah, I shouldn't go there. So the people that look for alternatives are always in the minority, I think, and everybody, 80% will just accept their situation as is and and try to go along with that.
Yeah, but I do believe Bitcoin will drive a shift longer term. I believe that even if it is a minority, even if it is like this intransigent minority of 10%, let's say, I think that 10% will drive a broader shift in society, like to the rest of the world. But it's going to take some time to get there. It's not going to happen tomorrow. So I think until then, you have to sort of learn to play the game and do a little bit of, for some people, that's doing the Geoarbitrage game and just being a little open-minded to different options that are out there. So Mara, it's been a great chat with you. Do you have any, closing thoughts, any final pieces of advice for people? Maybe if somebody's thinking about going to Argentina, do you have any advice for somebody who's considering Argentina?
I have. I'm pretty active on Twitter. You can see my pinned tweet has a lot of recommendations for Argentina. It goes from currency to restaurants, etc. in Buenos Aires. If you need additional advice or whatever, you can always DM me on Twitter, and I'll see it. And of course, if you want to read more about Argentina's history, currency issues, etc., I also have a blog, so you can also read more on that blog. I think if you have any questions, just hook me up on Twitter, and I'll respond.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Show notes are available at stephanlivera.com. Thanks, and I'll see you in the Citadels.